Apologies for the poor lighting on this one. It's quite late at night and I'm in a hotel. I got jet lag due to flying a 14-hour time zone difference or something like that. Therefore, I'm awake in the middle of the night, which is all right. I quite like it, actually. I like it when the rest of the world is quiet. But yeah, anyway, I thought I would record this in the middle of the night. So what I want to talk about, really, these videos I'm trying to do lately, these podcasts, these ones on my own especially, is I want to try to clarify from my own understanding some of the common misconceptions that I see within the internal arts, because I think some of these misconceptions are actually a little bit dangerous. So one of the ones I did previously was looking at the sort of nature of sexual practice and non-ejaculation, not ejaculating, because there's much confusion around that with regards to the spiritual arts. So that's why I did the previous episode on this. This episode, what I want to look at is this kind of common idea that the awakening process that's inherent within the internal arts is a sort of psychologically or an emotionally difficult thing. You know, I'm sure you've seen the memes, sort of spiritual jokes, if you want, isn't it? When they show somebody, you know, saying this is what we thought the spiritual process would be like, and it shows someone in a state of peace, and then it goes, what it's actually like, and it shows someone freaking out and going crazy. So there's this kind of idea that's been propagated that actually the awakening process is a very emotionally violent and difficult and slightly insane thing. Like you have to go insane in order to sort of awaken or something. And it's funny because it's become a new cliche, because the old cliche, the original cliche, but it's actually a very peaceful process, and the new cliche is actually the awakening process is very sort of emotionally difficult. Now, I've seen these memes and these jokes going around for a while, and it's got to the stage where now this is the view. Most people believe that the awakening process has to be emotionally very difficult. And it's not true, actually. It's a huge error. And in fact, it's a dangerous error. And that's why I want to look at it. That's why I want to look at it, because first of all, let's break it down. First of all, let's take away the idea of awakening, because awakening is a very specific thing. It has a very specific definition, and it's very far along in the process, and very few people are awakened or will become awakened. So there's this idea that, you know, there's more awakened people now than there's ever been, or there's a mass awakening of people going on, but it's not true. It's not true at all. Normally what they're defining as awakening is people starting to recognize the workings of their mind. And they might name it in different ways, but that's usually what they're talking about, because when you see them start to write and you see that, or start to teach about what they say awakening is, usually what they're saying is, you know, seeing the source of your thoughts, or understanding the nature of the egoic mind, or understanding your acquired nature, or something like this. I wouldn't call this awakening. I would call this developing insight into how your mind works. I mean, that's really quite fundamental. But then my definition of things is often a bit different from other people's anyway. Like, you know, people's definition of the sort of end of the process being without suffering or something, as if being peaceful and being without suffering is the end of the path, which is very far from it. It's actually the beginning of the path, to alleviate the mind's suffering until you're in a state of centeredness and peace in the current moment, has become, by many, I don't want to insult people, spiritual speakers and teachers, it's become what they talk about, isn't it? As if it's the big be-all and end-all. And the fact is, actually, that for a lifetime practitioner of the spiritual arts, maybe someone who's a monk or someone who disappears into the Himalayas for their entire lifetime or something, that process of finding peace so you're not suffering would not be their end goal, it would be their start point. So what people are often turning into the end goal is actually the starting position for spiritual practice. And this is something that I've tried to explain to the people I teach as well, is that, look at it this way, you know, like a lot of people, the reason that they practice meditation or they practice the spiritual arts is because they're uncomfortable with something. There's some kind of suffering or disturbance that is leading them to practice it. Not everybody, but a lot. it's like maybe you struggle with your thoughts, or maybe you struggle with some trauma, or maybe you struggle with a discomfort in life, maybe you just don't fit in or something. There's usually something like that underpinning, a kind of dukkha, a kind of disturbance that's kind of core and underpinning your identity, and that's what's driving you into meditation or the spiritual arts. And a lot of people then, I would say that's 90% at least, get nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that's negative, but I believe that to be the main reason why lots of people do these practices. They want to be at peace, they want to alleviate their suffering. So then maybe they meditate for 20 years or something like that, or practice qigong or yoga or whatever it is they're doing, and they get to a stage where they are not suffering anymore. But maybe lots of people don't. Obviously lots of people don't do that well, but some people do well in their practice, and they get to the stage when they're not suffering anymore. They're not in trauma, they've alleviated all of their difficulty, they are now at peace, they are without dukkha, they are centered, they're in the present moment. And then at that stage, what will happen to a lot of people is they'll wish to stop practicing, which is fine, they should, because they have achieved their goal. Whereas other people, maybe the smaller percentage, will get to this stage and then they'll suddenly realize that they've set the groundwork for meditation practice. So what I try to explain to people that I'm teaching is, when you get to that stage where the desire to strive and push and get rid of your suffering is gone, that's the point where you will discover whether you are a meditator or not. That's the point where you'll discover whether the spiritual path is for you, because without that motive anymore of alleviating your pain, what do you have to drive you forward? And for most people, they don't have anything, so then they'll stop. Whereas for a smaller percentage, they'll realize that actually there's something that's calling them that's deeper than their own suffering, something that is more profound. There's a magnetic pull towards the spiritual path, or towards union with something higher that goes beyond their personal suffering. But actually, that's a smaller percentage than you might realize. I don't think many people actually are right for that path. But so what you'll find is that most people, and again, I'm not saying that's wrong, but most people are coming at these arts from a position of already being in pain. And whether they want to create some other story around why they're meditating, I want to change the world, I want to become enlightened or something like that, or I want to become the next Buddha, or whatever it is, actually what's really happening is some kind of underpinning trauma or discomfort is causing them to practice. And like I say, when a lot of people get to a stage where they come to terms with or alleviate their suffering, then they no longer have a motive anymore. Now, often what happens is those people who no longer have a motive, so therefore they no longer have a drive to practice, they think they're finished. And then sadly what happens is those people often then go on to make a career out of that experience. So then they'll start setting up their school or their teaching tour or something, or write books where the whole point of the path is to be at peace and to be in the current moment and to be without suffering, as if that's the be-all and end-all. Now, I have mixed feelings on it, because I think actually most people, I think that message is really good. I think it's a profound message. I think it's one people need to hear. But at the same time, it's also a little bit misleading, because often it's people that were coming at it from a place of trauma, not really proper practitioners. So therefore they never achieve anything higher. So then the goalposts get moved closer because people believe that's the end of the path. So another time, in another video, maybe I'll talk about what my views are on where the path goes, and the fact that it does go beyond this stage of not suffering, because this to me is still psychology. If you think about it, like if you're suffering, if you're in turmoil, if you're in trauma, if there's any activity in the mind, then it's psychology. So essentially what people are discussing as the end of the path is mastering their psychology, if you like, or coming to terms with the psychological discomfort their own mind causes them. This is why I say it's a kind of precursor to further work rather than the end of the path, because it's still based in mind. I can already sort of detect the feedback I'll get to this, because one of the comments people often write is all is mind, as if that's an answer to anything. And actually it's not really what it's pointing at. I mean, that statement is not saying that everything is done in the mind. What it is implying is that manifest phenomena is based in mind, as in based in psychology. So once you are beyond mind, if you like, on this level, then what it means is the path is ready to begin. But of course, when you're beyond mind, then you will be beyond suffering. And then that's when you discover that, okay, there's a place we can start from to now launch our spiritual practice. It reminds me very much, if you've ever been involved in the Japanese arts, the kind of phenomena of people getting a black belt, a dan grade, and then quitting, which is, if you've ever been involved in karate or judo or aikido, it's a bit of a joke. It's like a running gag, isn't it? And that once people get a dan grade, you never see them again. Or maybe they come once or twice to class so they can feel good about wearing their black belt because they earned it. But then they stop training because they view the black belt as the end of the path, rather than realizing that black belt meant you finished your foundation training. So now you are ready to start studying a martial art. This is why, for example, in karate, the Japanese system I'm most familiar with, a black belt usually takes between, well, you can do it in 3 years. I think, well, these days you can buy it, go to a strip mall place, can't you, and get it in a week or something. But it used to be 3 years minimum, but most people between 3 and 5 years, if they train properly to get a black belt. A little different from something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something that has a very different take on it. But the traditional Japanese arts, such as karate, would be 3 to 5 years. Now, 3 to 5 years in any style, such as Tai Chi or something, is foundations. You've only done the foundation work. So again, the black belt indicates that you finish the foundation work. Now we are ready to start teaching you a martial art. Same with Tai Chi. 3 to 5 years of Tai Chi is about what it takes, I think, for people to learn the foundations. Then you can start learning Tai Chi. And similar with meditation. And I'm not saying 3 to 5 years. Meditation might take a bit longer. Who knows? Maybe some people are faster, but it's a more complex thing. Now, in meditation, once again, alleviating your psychological suffering is the equivalent of the black belt. It doesn't mean you now quit and master meditation. It means you're now ready to begin learning the spiritual arts, how to unify with spirit. Now, as a framework, that's very clear to me because, and I'm not claiming to be awakened or anything like this, not at all. I would never make such claims. I think that's a dangerous or risky thing to do. But for me personally, I think it sets out a really nice framework, because if we're very honest with ourselves, we can already figure out if we're suffering. And I don't mean, if our life is uncomfortable. I'm very comfortable here in a nice hotel room, traveling the world or whatever. Even jet lags, it's hardly the biggest problem in the world, is it? Just means I've become nocturnal. But I'm more, even with all of my comfortable surroundings, I'm still away if my mind is torturing me, if my mind is causing me to worry or stress or something. And if it is, if there's any kind of suffering, what it means is I'm still working towards that black belt, that marker that I need to finish the foundation work in my spiritual practice. So this is a very clear marker, and you can see this then with meditators or spiritual practitioners, because if they are still struggling with their mind, if they still have ups and downs emotionally or psychologically, or troubled by this, that, or the other, or, I heard of one spiritual practitioner who was claiming to be of a very, very high level, but then it was discovered that he spent a lot of his life living on antidepressants, and he was struggling mentally with a physical ailment. To me, that means that that practitioner hadn't finished the foundation work. It doesn't matter how they try to justify it, he hadn't finished the foundation work, because the medication he was on to help him deal with the suffering his body was giving him, the suffering his mind was giving him. It was nothing to do with, a medication that he needed in order to stay alive. It was, on a physical level. It wasn't like he needed something to keep his heart pumping or something. He was using a medication to alleviate suffering in his mind, and then claiming to be awakened and teaching meditation, which is not true. If he had been awakened, if he had been at that particular level, there'd be no need for antidepressants. Of course not. Why would you have to do something that stabilizes your mood if you've got to the stage where you've, ended the psychological foundation work of meditation? Now, that doesn't mean that any advice that particular teacher gives is irrelevant, not at all. Perhaps he says some very wise things, but at the same time, we should be realistic about the level of the practitioner. And, some might say that's judgmental of me, and possibly, but I'm not, it's not like I spend a lot of time thinking about these other people or anything. I'm not applying that judgment. I'm using it as a model to show the judgment we can apply to ourselves. The model of the judgment we can apply to ourselves, because that is certainly the judgment that I apply to me, and not on a highly personal level. I don't critique myself till I'm a little huddled up ball in the corner crying, or something like that. I just, it's very clear to me. I'm like, oh, well, I'm struggling at the moment with my mind or whatever, or it's been a very difficult period. That means that I have not reached this particular marker in my practice. And for me, as someone who can handle the blunt truth, I like these very clear markers. Now, why I'm telling you all of this is because this brings us back to this idea or this meme that the awakening process is very painful. It's not true. It's not true. The actual awakening process would only ever begin once you had dealt with your psychology. Do you get what I mean? So if the foundation of our psychology was done, there is no more suffering. And as a sort of, maybe there might be the occasional annoyance that lasts 30 seconds, but then you return to your default state of not suffering. And then beyond that, this becomes the foundation for the practice. So then the awakening process is not painful at all. So what is it, if it's not the awakening process, what is it that people are finding painful? It's looking inside. That's it. That's all they're finding painful, is looking inside. It's not even some deep spiritual process. It's literally looking inside. It's right at the very, 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 very start of the whole process, looking inside the body. So obviously when you look inside, what is happening is you're placing your mental attention within the same locale, if you like, as your body-mind system, rather than out. Because most of us, like there's no point in your life where you're naturally ever inside. I don't know if you know this, but you never are. Because when you're awake, you're in the world. That's it. That's outside of you. The world is outside of you. I'm looking at this camera. This is outside of me. I'm looking around the room. This is outside of me. Okay? So that's outside number one. Then our second form of outside might be thinking. If I am in my thoughts, I'm still outside because my thoughts are still exterior to me. Now, that might sound strange because from a scientific perspective or whatever, I don't know if that's accurate, they might say your thoughts are in your head or something, so therefore the locale is inside my head. But fair enough, but in Eastern arts that's not quite true, because in Eastern definitions, the things that are created within the mind, your thoughts, are still a form of outside world. So the way I can equate this is, say this is my outside world, this room that I'm sat in here with this rather nice, I like this couch, Chesterfield couch, and I think it's a Chesterfield, isn't it? I think that's what they're called. On this couch. Anyway, got distracted. This is one kind of outside, the obvious outside. But then there's other outside worlds. For example, you guys are watching me, unless you're listening to the audio version, you're watching me on this camera. So you're essentially in your outside world, looking at a screen, looking at another outside world. And then it could get even more bizarre because people can have virtual reality headsets now and have another outside world. But it's only a visual phenomena that's created, so it looks like you're somewhere else. It's still an outside world. Now your thoughts are the same. The things that you visualize and think and feel and emote create a form of outside world that your awareness goes into. So it's a funny definition of outside, but it means if you're awake, you're outside. If you're thinking, you're outside. Okay? Because it's not to do with locale. It's to do with whether your awareness is honestly within the center of your being or within something that's being created by your sense faculties on the outside or created by your thoughts. So then people say, what about when you're asleep? Well, usually when you're asleep, you're dreaming, whether you're aware of it or not. It might be a sort of low hubbub of dreams, that's vague, or it might be very, very vivid. Some people are really out there in their dreams, which is another form of outside. It's still outside. It's another world created by the mind. So many of the sort of, Taoism, as an example, talked, didn't it, about the difference between waking and dreaming, this idea of Chuang-Tzu. I'm trying to understand if it was a butterfly dreaming as a man or man dreaming as a butterfly. And there's a lot of implications. People try to say, it's about the dream world being as real as the outworld. It's not, to me. I mean, that whole story and this whole concept is saying there's no difference with regards to the spiritual arts if you are awake and a man or asleep and a butterfly. They're both outside. They're both external realities. So there's no difference between them because they're both generated within your mind. Is that the only outsides you have? It is really, isn't it? It's that which is literal, created by your sense faculties, which you're receiving through your, auditory, visual senses, feeling and stuff like that. There is stuff that's created by your thoughts. That's another outside world. And then there's your dreams. There's the outside world, and that's it. So unless you're aiming to do anything spiritually or anything internally, what it means is your whole life is spent outside. So if it's not natural to be inside, then of course it has to be trained. And this is where meditative arts came in, or internal arts. So they had different ways, didn't they? Some ways were to find a sort of, a transient form of outside, such as your breathing. Transient and depersonalized, yet still part of you, was used as a kind of model to draw you in. Or the other traditions looked at sort of trying to look into inside of the nature of way the outside of your thoughts were created until you went in. Or in something like Qigong, they were building enough qi that you could absorb. It would, like a magnet, draw you into the inside. Or perhaps in Tai Chi, an embodied art, so that you were using the form of your body as a way to stabilize the mind until you went inside. They had many different methods, but they were all trying to train you to go inside. Now, the truth of the matter is, when you go inside, when you finally go inside, it's peaceful. It's very, very peaceful, because when you are inside, you are devoid of, let's get this really clear. When you are inside, when your awareness is inside, you are devoid of the outside world. Okay? That's world one. You're then devoid of your thoughts. They're not there. That's outside world two, gone. And you're without your dreams either if you're inside when you're asleep. So your dreams cease. So that's outside world three, gone. So therefore all the outside worlds are gone. And without those three outside worlds, there's nothing to create turmoil, because suffering is either created by the literal outside world. I stubbed my toe in the middle of the night. I did that about 20 minutes ago or something like that. Or, I'm suffering because of the outside world of my thoughts, my feelings and my emotions, or I'm suffering because of the outside world of my dreams, if I'm having a stressful dream, a nightmare or a night terror or something like that. So once I can only suffer, I can only experience all of the discomfort if I'm outside. If I'm inside, there is nothing to generate that suffering. So actually what arises is a deep sense of peace and a deep sense of joy. Almost a maternal or paternal, depending on what frequency you're on, kind of love that arises from within the center, a huge peaceful sensation that often when you come from the inside back to the outside of your thoughts or the outside of the world, then it sort of radiates as this great sense of bliss that enamors your whole body, sometimes temporarily for a little while, and sometimes it can last longer and longer if people spend longer periods of time there. Now, of course, if you understand this phenomena, and you know much about the sort of writings within the spiritual scene, this kind of bliss or love or joy is discussed within spiritual practice as something that is normal for within these arts, right? It's a recorded and standardized, is that the word? Or constant, a consistent result that arises across the different traditions. And I've been involved in Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, little bits of other things, but not enough to comment. And I would say out of the ones I'm talking about here, Buddhism and Taoism the most, and Hinduism not quite so much, but enough that I can have an opinion on it, I think. And then the other arts I don't really deserve opinion on because I haven't studied them enough, but those three I can talk about. Buddhism, Taoism with some authority, I think, these days. It's probably arrogant to say, but I think I probably can. And Hinduism a little bit less. But so I have enough background in those three to know that the experience of being inside is consistent across the three, and consistently discussed across the three as well. So that when you are inside and peaceful, you will find the natural state of your mind, which is actually, it's like deeper than peace. It's a radiant joy that comes out of you. Now, some people have touched on this, and they've touched on this for experiences of short periods of time. Maybe many of you have. Maybe you've had that. You finish meditating and you're just like, wow, I feel amazing afterwards. I feel so blissful. And then maybe it fades. Or maybe some of you are trained to the point where it's a kind of constant. I would say that's where I am. I know that some of my detractors would not believe this. But unless I'm tired, actually, if I'm literally lacking in qi, like now, a bit jet lagged, or at the end of teaching a long seminar, I'm a little bit lacking in energy. And actually, I find that without the prop of the energy, when I'm a little bit more tired, I'm just a bit more flat. Actually, that's normally what happens. So right now, jet lag and post-teaching 3 months, I would say that emotionally, my experience of myself is that I'm a little flat, not depressed, not upset, not angry, not any other thing, just a bit sort of numb. And what happens is as I rest and my energy comes back, then I go back to my normal state, which is that I'm generally pretty cheerful. And I think most people that hang around with me for any period of time would agree that I'm generally a fairly happy, smiling individual. And that's been the case for a number of years now. I would say maybe 4 or 5 years. It's been very stabilized in me. And the reason it's stabilized in me is because of the amount of time that I've spent going inside. So this bliss actually is very useful, because being someone in the public eye, I do get a fair amount of abuse. Everything from people criticizing me, which is fine, whatever, through to people saying the most insane things, accusing me of being a, what's the latest one? They think I'm a member of the CIA infiltrating the internal arts. Some people have got some mental health issues to deal with, and it's weird. But, like, receiving all of that, none of it affects me, none of it impacts me, because I'm still happy all of the time. And this is something, the first time I started to notice it was I started to realize that through my practice and spending more time inside, out of the outer world, out of the thoughts, out of the dreams, all of that is gone. So that I was inside, I was just naturally becoming more and more blissed out, essentially. Still very functional. It's not like being high or something like that. It's different. But when encountering difficulties, it's fine. It's like the difficulty was nullified by that experience, so it couldn't take a hold. Now, some people hearing that might think that's an arrogant thing for me to say, but I don't think it is. I'll tell you why. Because I still think it's foundation level. I still view it as foundation level. I think it's the equivalent. Maybe I'm just getting my black belt in meditation. Maybe that's what it is, meaning I'm just getting to the stage where I'm ready to start spiritual practice. Maybe that's what it is. After all these years, I feel I'm ready to start learning to meditate. Now, I've been meditating since I was a kid, and I've been to numerous teachers, lamas, all kinds of people to try to learn it. But I would say that now I've got to the stage, it took longer than 3 to 5 years, where I'm not suffering. I'm living in a state where I'm generally, 95% of the time, cheerful and connected. And one of the results of that is you find that there's less striving and less yearning. That's definitely true. And also there's a greater degree of connection with people around me, so that I feel very loving towards them. So those things I'm saying, some people might think that's arrogant because it sounds like quite a high thing, but actually I think it's a low thing. It means I'm just ready to start meditation. And I'm only just now discovering that actually I do have a deep sense of interest and a deep sense of yearning for the spiritual arts. Up until this stage, I would never have known, because maybe my spiritual practice, my internal work, was still based upon a striving to be better, or to alleviate my own suffering, or to be amazing, or whatever it is, or to get away from this trauma from my past, or whatever. And I can't have known if that was the reason I was practicing or not, if that was my sole reason, until I got to this stage, because I might have got here and gone, well, I'm happy now, so I may as well stop. In which case, I wasn't the right person for the path. Maybe I've rambled a bit. I'll try and be more succinct. But it is the middle of the night, and it's jet lag, and it's me, so I talk a lot. So, that's why I'm saying these are not high-level things. I think the only reason they might sound like high-level things to some people is I believe that, mistakenly, and not a personal criticism, I think it's nobody can be blamed for a confusion. Nobody can be blamed for a confusion. I don't think that's fair. I think deliberate misleading, that's different, but I don't think many people do that. I think most people are just confused. So I think what happens is many people get to that stage, maybe further than me, where they're living in a state of bliss and state of connection, and again they've made out that's awakening. So all of a sudden it sounds like a very high-minded thing, especially as most of us, are quite aware of how we are, and in a world of most of us suffering in some kind of turmoil and stress and fear of the future, and fear of not having enough of this, and fearing of not being good enough, and self-judgmental and self-criticism, which we're acutely aware of, that's the state of most of our psychology for most of our life, criticizing us or ourselves, because we know ourselves. It sounds amazing to someone to be in a state of happiness or non-suffering, and also sounds very high, sounds very far away. But I don't think it is. I think it's more than reachable by everybody. I think it's more than reachable by everybody. I think it's easily attainable if people follow the path correctly and understand the process and really sort of go into it. And then, like I say, I think it's still, to me, foundation work for meditation. I think it's still achieving that black belt. Hope I explained that okay. So this comes back to this kind of what I was saying about this idea of the awakening process is very uncomfortable. I don't think that's the case. Certainly my experience of it, my personal experience, and again, I'm not claiming to be awakened. My personal experience is that the deeper you go into the internal arts, the internal work, the greater there is a sense of peace and bliss that radiates through the body. And it's not a sort of emotional excitation. It's not like, wow, or something like that, not at all. It's a contentment and I don't know how to describe it, a great sense of love, ease and comfort that arises within you, that makes you very, very comfortable with yourself. That's for sure. Your own company becomes amazing. But then also with other people too, no matter what condition or state they're in themselves or what they're trying to do to you. It's a good state to be in. Whatever word I use won't do it justice. And I'm not, I don't even see myself as a spiritual teacher. I'm an internal arts teacher. It's a different thing. And I'm maybe not the most eloquent of them anyway, but I'm pretty sure I could take this same process if I thought about it and wrap it up in spiritual words. So it sounds very much like what a lot of what the gurus might be saying, or what people view as gurus these days. I don't think they are, but what is viewed as gurus. But very attainable by everybody. But that really should be the experience of the awakening process. It should be the process of being inside. Say you've never done anything before, no meditation, no practice, no qigong, no yoga. And then someone shows you an efficient technique, and maybe perhaps you're, some kind of child prodigy or adult prodigy, I don't know, some genius at the arts, and then you started. If you could actually go inside, nei Gong, inner work, okay, internal arts, going inside, if you could actually go inside, you would only encounter peace and bliss. And the result of the peace and bliss is that it would start to radiate through your body and then change the way that you relate to all the parts of your mind that create the discomfort. Now, realistically, is that what we're going to do? No, definitely not. Like I say, some people are geniuses. I'm not, definitely not. And I think most people that I teach are not natural geniuses at the internal arts. If they were more natural, more people would master them. So therefore, they're very difficult. So what happens is you do encounter turmoil. You do encounter difficulties. You do encounter discomfort in your mind, mental pain and all this kind of stuff, and the chaos of who you are on the inside. But it's because you're not inside. It's because you're still outside. You're either outside in the world, or you're outside in your thoughts, or you're outside in your body. There's people do somatic work and discover all this discomfort inside their body, don't they? Which is great. Again, I'm not discounting the usefulness of that work. I use it a fair bit within my teachings. I'm not discounting it. I'm just saying it's still outside. If I'm still like, oh, there's a feeling here, there's something trapped in my shoulders and trapped in my hips, and it's creating this feedback loop in my mind or whatever, it's still outside. And if I'm engaging internal work and then that suffering is there, how about this? How about engage internal work and not even emotional stuff? What if it starts to generate headaches and pressure and discomfort on the body? That's still outside. You're still not inside. It means you are still outside to some degree, but you are mistaking inside. You're mistaking the meaning for inside for locating my awareness in the same physical location in space as my body, which is not what it means. It's a start point, because you do have to learn to put your mind in the body, but it is still outside. For example, if I put my mind in my hand, even the phrase it's not true, because you can't put your mind in your hand. Because, not according to spiritual arts, because if I put my mind in my hand, what do I mean? Well, I mean, my mind makes the same form as my hand. So we do need to start there, because in Qigong, I need to put my mind inside my hands. In Tai Chi, I need to be able to feel every little nerve impulse through my hands. But it's still outside, because it's still based in the form of a hand, and it's still based in the sensation that you're feeling. It's still based in what is happening in your mind, the framework that your mind is creating to give you feedback to the existence and location of your hand. So it's still outside. It's correct for the start of the art, but it's still outside. When I am inside, all of that ceases to be. You can't be inside your hand. It's, from a spiritual perspective, it's already a conflict, a contradiction. That's the word I'm looking for, in terms. Sorry, jet lag means I'm losing my words. Sorry. So it's a contradiction in terms, because I am inside and outside form. So inside should just be inside. That's it, just inside. Meaning free of the body, free of the senses, free of the thoughts, free of everything. Now I'm aware that maybe different. You can't start there. You can't start there. You do have to bring your mind into the hand. You do have to bring your mind into the body. But what I'm getting at is, it's still not really the thing or the state that leads you to actually encountering something that's deeper than you, and encounter what people might call soul or spirit or source, depending on the tradition, or Tao or Buddha mind, or any of these things. None of those things are encountered unless you're beyond those things. I hope that makes sense. So, if the awakening process is emotionally uncomfortable, it's not the awakening process that's uncomfortable, it's the process of learning to be inside. That's it. It means you haven't yet learned to be inside. So if I bring my mind inside, all of a sudden there's all these realizations. What do people call them? Shadows, shadow work. I need to integrate my shadows. And if there's all of that, or maybe a trauma comes up, or a pain, or I feel emotional, it means you're still outside. It means that you are locating your awareness within feelings and thoughts that may be stored in your body, or maybe not, but they're still outside. They're still within an external world that you've created. So this is where we need to separate the internal world from the psychological world, because of course the psychological world, or even the somatic world, would say, well, we need to deal with or process these things that arise, as if we need to make peace with them or something. And that's totally true, but that is actually an external psychological version of it. The internal version is actually, I go deeper than those things till I'm fully inside, and then the natural state from inside radiates through me and does the work. The danger, of course, and I can already pick up where people might pull this apart, is they might say that's, what do they call it, bypassing, or might cause you to bury things. Well, you can only bypass and you can only bury things, you can only repress something if you are still outside, if you're still in the level of the psychology. So often what happens when people go inside and they try to bypass that pain, they're actually numbing themselves. But numbing is still an outside form, because it's still a thought process, even if it's not an emotionally charged one. So it still doesn't mean inside. Inside means I go to the state where there is a great sense of peace. All time and form disappears until there's a radiant bliss that arises for short periods or long periods. And it's like that radiant bliss has a kind of power behind it. It generates an energy that rewires or reconfigures all of the causative paths within you to gradually alleviate deeper levels of suffering. So to reiterate what I'm saying, I'm kind of pulling apart this idea, or trying to, is it's not the awakening process that's uncomfortable, it's only the process of learning to go inside. And once you are inside, then actually the path is very pleasant. So this means that, putting it into that context, and again, not trying to be cruel or judgmental, I'm literally doing these videos to try to be useful. That's it. If I'm going to be awake in the middle of the night with jet lag, uncomfortable, I may as well be helpful, I may as well be useful, or at least try. So what I'm trying to point out is that when you see people, or if you're just yourself kind of caught in this idea that there's this great turmoil I'm going through, and I've had years of turmoil, so much turmoil with my process, because my shadows come up and I integrate, and all these kind of ideas which are very new age. What it means is you've still never gone inside. It means you've never gone inside, not yet. Nothing wrong with that, because it's not necessarily an easy thing. But the implication is that you shouldn't just keep wading through all of the turmoil, because if I keep wading through all the turmoil, it's not going to take you inside. All that's going to happen if I follow this and I go, right, okay, there's that pain and there's that trauma, here's a shadow I need to integrate, and I've learned about that, and all these kind of things. If you are going down that path, all that happens is you create further streams of complexity around that discomfort, meaning you're still outside. So you hear people talk about shadow work as if it's the most important part of the spiritual process. I disagree. I think shadow work, if you know what that is the most important part of the shadow work process. I think it's a very useful psychological process. Maybe it's a very good self-development process. So you become comfortable with yourself, great. But it's still outside. Actually, the most important part of the spiritual process, spiritual art, is not the shadow work, it's not the psychological work, it's going inside. That's it. It's simply to go inside. It means that all of the stuff that arises is almost just like chatter that we have to just not pay attention to until the awareness learns to get out of the externalized form, till it goes inside, until something arises. It makes it a very simple process, but also a very difficult one, because simple things often are. So when I hear people trying to talk about, the constant wading through more somatic experiences and shadows and things, I'm pro it from a psychological perspective, but let's not pretend it has a direct causative or correlative effect upon either awakening or connection to spirit or even internal work, because it's not really internal work, it's still external work. Mental work is external work. So it's not like, if I integrate 99% of my shadows, I can finally go inside. It doesn't work like that. It's a trained quality of awareness to step out of those things for periods of time. It doesn't mean that when you're awakened in the external world, you don't have to deal with your mind. Of course we do. We all have to manage our psychology or make adjustments so we feel better. Maybe we need to go to therapy, or maybe we need to go to counseling, or maybe we need to adjust our behavior. All of that is true completely. But it's not really internal work. It's external work. Still external work. So you can't keep cleaning the external work and then eventually you go inside. It doesn't work like that, because you'll never end your suffering or alleviated in that method. You might deal with a particular trauma. Maybe you had something very bad happen to you and you can deal with that. But the complexities and layer of suffering are so much that you'll never really, it's not like it'll end. The mind will create more. The mind will create more and more and more. Maybe you become better at, you've got a higher level of emotional intelligence, or a higher level of somatic intelligence, a higher level of psychological intelligence perhaps, so that you can deal with these things. But you still won't go inside, because it's not a causative chain that does that. I can't become more external to become internal. So in actual fact, the internal process is not to work through that, but actually to go deeper inside until there is a peace and a bliss that arises, and that does the work for you. And again, I do know the danger of saying this, because people, if they lack common sense, do people lack common sense? I'll leave that as a rhetorical question. If people lack common sense, let's say, what they might do is they might ignore psychological issues that they should be dealing with by simply pretending or whatever that they're just going to go inside to deal with it. But obviously that would be a poor level of common sense. The common sense thing to do would be to do things with your external mind psychologically to feel better and to continue to go inside. It's both at the same time. Because if you can truly find that inside space where the peace and the bliss and the connection and the love arises, then it will start to integrate those things anyway until it becomes a more normal state. So you don't have to wade through years and years of shite, basically. So that's the kind of psychological difficulty that people are experiencing. When they're saying that the awakening process is painful, actually what they mean is going inside is difficult. So because they're applying their attention to deeper parts of their outside, that's a confusing term, isn't it? Meaning into what is stored in their body or stored in the mind, this level of external form, the awareness then generates a reaction which creates more emotional turmoil. So therefore it feels like you're on this wild ride that is leading you closer to a spirit or awakening, but it's not. It's not. It's leading you deeper into an understanding of how messed up your psychology might be, that's all. So here's another one as well. Here's another kind of suffering that can arise from not being able to go inside. This is making your nervous system more highly strung, so that you become more sensitive in a negative way, let's say. This is common. This is a form of dragon sickness, and I've known many people suffer this, and I've seen it happen a lot more since the COVID era. A lot more, even to some people I knew quite well, who were suddenly isolated and locked down for a year, 2 years, sometimes in their flat on their own, and it's happened to a lot of people. And all of a sudden, they went mad, essentially. They developed, like, chi deviation has gone through the roof. So if you don't know what chi deviation is, it's an error that can arise in internal work. And just like like virus is a term. You go to your doctor and he has a virus that says you have a virus. That could be one of a million things, Same with G deviations. There's different types of, but one of the most common ones that has increased exponentially since COVID was a heightened level of stress and a heightened level of isolation. Now, what happens when you're very stressed and you're very isolated is you tend to spend more time introspective, which is why one of the worst things for people's mental health is to be isolated. We all know that. I'm in America right now, and America has a lot of people really struggling with their mental health, which is terrible, terrible to see. Europe has a lot too, Asia has a lot, but America, everything's bigger in America. Everything's on a bigger scale, and mental health is on a massively bigger scale here. Now, people blame many things, the food, the culture, whatever, I don't know, the drug problems, but, Europe has shit food. Europe has cultural problems. Europe has drug issues. So there's something else. And I think, actually, in America, a lot of people are very isolated. They're very on their own. And you see it. You see this culture, not to rip into America, because I like the country, but I think the problem America has is because there is this whole kind of culture of, how to put this diplomatically, as an outsider's perspective, as America has this culture of you're an individual and you can be anything you want to be. So the stereotype is you see the sort of TV programs where they're telling all the kids they can be the president. You can be the president of America one day. And I've spoken to some Americans who students of mine who say, yeah, they were told things like that when they were younger. And of course, we know that's not true. You can't be the president unless you're a member of the Illuminati. No, it's not true. Or is it? So, but no, obviously not everybody can be the president. But they then, take it, it's like everybody can be special. You can all be amazing. So there's this kind of attitude of everybody can be unique, but then nobody is. Like the very nature of unique, I mean, some people are, of course, but the very nature of being the elite or the top of something means you have to be rare. So it means that most people, by definition, can't be special in that way. So I think what happens is it creates a kind of form of sort of depression or self-loathing here in America that I speak to a lot of people. They have kind of self-esteem issues are very, very high. There's a kind of deep self-loathing in a lot of people because they couldn't live up to what they had pumped into them when they were younger. Now, again, I apologize. That's an outsider's view of America, so it might be inaccurate. And the same happens in Europe, same happens in England, but it's to a lesser scale. I think England was more brought up with, you're doing well if you have enough money to live and stuff like that. You're doing good. Whereas in America, it's like you're a failure unless you have a Bugatti, 5 mansions and 6 hot girlfriends or something, and you all have to be amazing at something. That kind of attitude is pumped into people here a lot higher. So I think what happens is that self-loathing starts to then cause people to isolate and step away. I think they realize, I can't be special in this crowd, so they pull away. So I see lots of normal people all of a sudden either being mentally isolated or socially isolated or literally isolated to sort of, so they don't have anyone to compare themselves to. And then the result is they spend a lot of time introspecting on all of their failures, and the result is then their mental health breaks down. And I think that's what's going on. Combine that with a few drugs and what have you, and then you've got a recipe for disaster. So I'm looking over here because I'm looking out the window, and actually there's some people out there who don't look like they're doing too well. So why am I talking about that? Yes, because during COVID, I saw that amplified, and I knew it was going to happen. When they started locking everything down, I was like, oh shit, here we go. People are on their own, they're going to go mad. And I think I even wrote some posts on social media saying, people are going to struggle, so look after your mental health. And lo and behold, there's been a massive increase in people with chi deviation. Now, one of the most common forms of chi deviation is to isolate yourself and then look inside, or one of the reasons it happens, and you're looking inside. You're more introspective because you're not socializing, but you don't really have the ability to go inside. You don't have meditative skill yet. So all that happens is when you go inside, you actually end up outside. You end in another form of outside. You end up in your own thoughts and your own emotions and your own feelings inside the body. And the result is a lot of people will just cause amplification of that, massive amplification. So what goes up? Your sensations in your body. And when your sensations in your body go up, they cause more thoughts. And then your thoughts will feed back into the sensations and create a loop till your brain will rationalize the sensations and then generate more sensations. Do you understand that you get like a loop? So it's rhetorical. I say, do you understand that? The camera's not going to answer, is it? I must be going mad. It's because I'm isolated and talking to myself with jet lag. So do you get that? It's like you're inside, but you're not really. You're just introspectively on the wrong layer of outside. You're in your thoughts. You're in your emotions. So then you start to feel things more that are creating the body and justifies it. And what happens is you start to believe your own thoughts and you believe your own sensations in the body, but they're not accurate. So you create a whole new reality. And that's called mental illness. It will create mental illness. Now, many of you know, if you've listened to me ramble on before, that one of my previous jobs was working in the psychiatric services. And the same things that are happening to people in the internal arts world, yoga, qigong, meditation, all these things, are already happening to people that are having psychological breakdowns as well. It's the same kind of thing. Now, there's a couple of qualities that are standard across both groups. One, they believe their own thoughts. And one of the easiest ways to become mentally ill is believe your own thoughts. And I don't mean like, you know, I like this bottle or not like this bottle. I do like this bottle, it's got flour on it, like trivial things like that. But rather you believe your own thoughts, like, I feel this. So maybe there's a reason I feel this sensation in my chest, rather than bodies just have feelings. So therefore it must be something. And then it gets in your head, and then the thought feeds into your mind. And then maybe your mind thinks, oh, well, somebody looked at me the other day on this bit of my body off the top of my head. So therefore they must have caused that. And then when I think about that person, that feeling gets stronger. So then that feeling of that stronger justifies it in my head. And then I loop around. And the next thing you know, I believe that that person is psychically attacking me. And that's what happens. It creates a kind of loss of reality, paranoid psychosis. And I saw this in the mental health units I worked in, but I'm also seeing it arising within people in the internal arts, left, right, and center. And as I say, exploding exponentially since COVID. And what it is people with no actual meditative skill, and I don't mean that as an insult because it's a very hard thing to achieve, introspecting into a layer of the outside until they lose sense of reality. It's sad. And there's some teachers, I know some teachers that live in this state that believe their own thoughts and have created a full sense of reality. And then the problem is you can't ever tell them anything. How can you tell someone who can justify what they're thinking because they can feel it in their body? How can you convince them get them to understand that their view of reality is wrong? Because they have this feedback loop between my senses and my mind and my senses and my mind. So they go down a dodgy route. Now, usually what starts to happen is they then become very, very uncomfortable within their body. All their nervous system is wired. There's more energy in it for a start because I'm feeding it with my mind and I'm also acutely aware of it. So they get very uncomfortable and the discomfort creates more thoughts. So then they'll come up with crazy belief systems. Then eventually it might start to lead to headaches and insomnia and all kinds of issues that are quite detrimental to a person's life. So there's two cures, two ways to cure it. Well, there's probably more, isn't there? Two ways to cure it. First of all, understand what the issue is. You think you're inside, but you're not. You're still outside. You're just in the wrong outside. So therefore, you have to either go more outside is the first key, to the real outside, okay, meaning the outside world. So therefore, you should stop all internal practice immediately, socialize more, and do external things. Play tennis, play basketball, go to the gym, lift weights, I don't know, do stuff with your body, run, whatever. And now I have suggested this to so many people with chi deviations and they just look at me super disappointed because they don't want to hear that. But it's not that being outside or doing something physical with your body is lower. It's not that I'm saying you're not capable of doing internal work. What I'm saying is you need to reset your sense of reality. Because if I don't know why I chose tennis as an example. I don't even play tennis. I played a similar game recently with a friend of mine, but not a tennis player. But say you got a tennis ball, right? And it comes and it hits your racket, boom. And you hit that ball and you feel it through your muscles, like everything connected in, like boom, there it is. There's a sensation of that. Then you run and you hit the thing and you see the ball go back and forwards. That's real. You are seeing a reality. You are feeling within your body something that is literally true. So I'm creating an external feedback through my nerves to my brain of this is me hitting the tennis ball and this is what it feels like. Do you understand? And it resets your reality rather than you locked in the reality of sensation feeds thoughts, thoughts create sensation. So there's and that's mental illness. So that's option one. Option 2 is actually to go inside. But option 2 is more dangerous because option 2 means you have to actually meditate. But the problem is, on the way to meditation, when you can't do it properly, you'll actually just go back to this false inside once again. You'll go back to the mentally ill state. But the truth is, if you could actually go inside and touch that bliss and that peace, all of your chi deviation symptoms would go away. They would be corrected by going inside. Now I know some of you with chi deviations listen to this video, you're going to go, right, option 2 is the one for me. I disagree. Option 1 is the thing for you. Option 1 is the thing for you because it's easier to do. And if you're already in a state where you've lost a sense of reality, the equivalent of going through the massive turmoil in the internal, the awakening process is so painful, then you need to go back to doing something external so you can develop a real feedback into your body and reset your system. Only then can you go back to internal work. That is a better way for you to approach the condition. Hope that made sense. So, this kind of turmoil, oh yeah, I said there's a couple of qualities that internal practitioners who get chi deviation share with people who have psychiatric issues. Number 1 was a loss of sense of reality. Number 2 is it feels to other people around them like they're generating a lot of energy. And you'll universally experience this. So if you've ever been in a psychiatric unit, and I'm not well, certainly when I was doing that work, I wasn't a particularly aware person to energy. Maybe now I would be, but when I was younger and I was working in psychiatric units, I wouldn't say I was more sensitive than your average person, like not really. But even then, I would go into the ward around people with extreme mental illness. Remember, these aren't internal arts practitioners, these are people with mental illness. And it would feel like you're buffeted with like hot magnetism. It was, being close to them was very, very difficult. And sometimes it was almost like a magnetic sort of pulsing or flashing in the head. And maybe some of you can equate with this if you've ever been around people in very high states of stress or people with psychiatric breakdown or in psychotic states. They're like that. It's like you've been buffeted by energy. It's not actually what's happening. You're not being buffeted by, it can be draining, it can be really tiring. You're not being buffeted by energy at all. They're not giving off lots of energy. It's not the case. What's actually happening, if you want to understand it, is look to the, well, there's an interview I did with a lady called Cindy Engel, who I often mention in these podcasts. And she wrote a book recently about somatic empathy, or you can listen to the podcast that me and her did together on somatic empathy, or go look her up, look up her work. And somatic empathy, you know, badly paraphrasing Cindy's studies, is basically that one person's nervous system will copy another person's nervous system. So if I'm around someone with a psychotic break and I'm within their vicinity and I'm giving them my attention, my nervous system will start to emulate what theirs does. And it all comes from sort of primal, the way animals communicate. Two dogs meet each other, one dog is stressed, the other dog doesn't have, there's no complex language where one dog can tell the other one it's stressed. So one dog's nervous system will copy the other one, so it feels in itself somatically, it empathizes with the other animal, so it knows what it's feeling. Now, human beings have that ability to do that to varying degrees. Some a lot, some not so much. But if you meet someone who's in a psychotic state, it's such a strong state that your nerves will often start to copy it. So the result is you will feel what their system feels like. And because it's so out of whack from normality, you feel fried. You feel all this energy running through your body. But what you're feeling is your nervous system in an extreme state of stress. Okay? They're not giving off any energy particularly. They are causing you to emulate them. And it will feel like there's tons of energy inside you. Oh, what's going on? You're feeling yourself in extreme stress. Now, the funny thing is, it's also really draining, because if you've ever tried to spend any time in extreme stress, it can be really exhausting. So after being on the psychological ward, I would go home and just be like, oh, where's my energy? I feel like I was emptied out. Now, if I was more new age, which I'm not, but if I was more new age, I might be saying, oh, they're stealing my energy or they're giving me energy. Not at all, not really. It's my own energy. I'm emulating what they're doing, and I can't cope with it. It's tiring. The other thing that can happen is, actually, I hope none of you listening are psychiatric nurses, but the people who worked on the wards all become a bit crazy themselves, because constantly being in that same state as the people around them meant that their nervous systems emulated the people with psychotic breaks around them and created that feeling. They went a bit mad as well. So it's not necessarily the healthiest environment if you want to maintain your sanity. And it's funny, actually, I'm off on a tangent here, but when I worked in the psychiatric ward, isn't that odd? There was a whole movement. A lot of the nurses I worked with, male and female nurses, all went out in the mornings and played tennis and badminton. That's odd, because I was using tennis as an example. They always used to go early and play badminton. I never really cottoned. I wonder if that's normal. I wonder if what a lot of people do work in those services. It was like they were giving themselves, they'd subconsciously given themselves an external practice to do in the morning to reset their reality, maybe, before they went on to the ward. Or maybe that's a reach. I don't know. Maybe they just like tennis. Anyway, off on a tangent. Now, chi deviation people can feel the same. So if you're ever around someone who has a chi deviation, their loss of sense of reality, they think everybody's cursing them, or the angels are out to get them, or the deities are speaking to them, or they're the next Messiah, or something like that. When you're with them, they can feel like they're giving off a lot of energy, but they're not. They're doing the same. Your nervous system is copying their nervous system, which is getting really heightened. So it feels like you're buzzing, and they're extremely exhausting to be around. But that's the reason why. They're not giving off energy. They're causing you to go into a state where you're burning up yours. Somatic empathy is what is going on. So I think that this mistaken idea that somebody in this state is giving off a lot of energy is why people mistake a mental breakdown for an awakening process, which is mad. Those two should not be equated. But the amount of times I've heard people say that, the awakening process and going insane are very, very similar. They're very, very close. Madness and enlightenment are very similar. Madness and genius or something like that. Or they'll say, this person had an awakening experience and they flipped or something. They didn't really. No, what they had was they unskillfully went to the wrong layer of inside until their thought forms created a feedback loop between the body and the mind until it fried them. And they lost a sense of reality. That's what went on. If it had been a true awakening experience, then actually they would have been left with peace and bliss. It's impossible for anything else to arise if you actually go inside. No, I shouldn't even say awakening process, should I? Correct myself there. But if it was a true internal process, when they got inside, they would have been filled with bliss and peace. Bliss and peace. This has become a kind of core factor for me in my teachings and within my own studies and within my process, that I never try to be peaceful, I never try to be blissful, never have aimed for it. I've only ever tried to go inside. And it took me many, many years to even learn how to do that. And when I go inside, to my, at least my clumsy version of it, then what arises is peace and happiness and bliss. And if that is not arising for somebody on the art, then it means they're not inside. So that kind of, I covered a few topics here in this one, but it kind of brings me full circle to this, where I started, that I'm saying the awakening process is not a process of turmoil. The awakening process is a process of peace. What might create turmoil is your process of learning to go inside, and when you can't do it, it creates that discomfort. In most people's cases, you just get a kind of introspective discomfort. But in some people's cases, it creates mental illness and chi deviations. The cure for such things is not to go inside anymore, but to go outside and reset the system so you can rediscover what a sense of reality is. But truthfully, you'll never tell someone at that state that they need to do that, because you can't tell someone with a psychologically imbalanced state that they're psychologically imbalanced, because the nature of the problem is they believe their own reality until they believe that the deities or other people are out to get them. Maybe the psychic wizards are hiding in the ceiling or something like that. If you start to have those thoughts, you might want to go and play tennis. That's the moral of this story. Now again, middle of the night, jet lag talks. Maybe that could be a new thing. We could have a jet lag series. I'll watch this back probably in a few days and realise it made no sense at all. And if that's the case, I'm really sorry. Midnight ramblings, but it could be a whole series, couldn't it? Jet lag talks. But I want to do this because I feel like I've shared quite a lot of information on the internet freely and openly for people. On the YouTube channel, I shared the basic Qigong methods for calming down and settling your breath and building energy, and there's the academy and all that as well. And what I feel is more useful right now is, more than me to share more methods, is I feel I want to do some videos, at least from my opinion, which is based on my experience. So, you know, I'm not saying I'm the gospel truth on everything, but I can only give my experience. Is I want to clarify as many of these misconceptions as I can, because I hope that's useful for people. So I want to do a series of sort of misconceptions on different arts like Bagua, because I know everyone's waiting for that one, or a lot of people waiting for that, and meditation. But I really wanted to start with these two, which number one was the last episode, which was, you know, about no-fap, I think is the common word for it, and this one about the sort of painful nature of awakening or something like that, and we'll see where it goes. And I'll try to do some of these because I'd like this information to be useful, because at some point soon I get bored of stuff after a while. I've done this for so many years. I don't even know how long my teaching career will last now. Career is a funny word. Maybe I've come as far as I can with regards to my interest in teaching. So I'm not sure how long that will carry on. Who knows? Don't know. I've got this Bali project I'm working on, and then I don't know. I'm going to take restock of whether I want to be a teacher particularly. But there's also this thing of how far you can come on social media, and I feel that, yeah, once I've done these series of videos on trying to clear up misconceptions, and I'll relook at this too, because maybe this isn't the most useful thing I could be doing. I'm not sure. Who knows? Just my thoughts. So thank you very much, and sorry if this one made no sense. Jet lag is my excuse.